But the big focus, Ohio's special congressional election. Democrat Danny O'Connor is facing off against Republican Troy Balderson in a close race that is seen as a big test for President Trump and Republicans ahead of the midterm elections. This is Outnumbered. I'm Melissa Francis, here today, host of Kennedy on the Fox Business Network, Kennedy herself, Fox Business Network anchor Dagan McDowell, Democratic strategist and Fox News contributor Jessica Tarlov, and joining us on the couch today, Fox News senior judicial analyst Judge Andrew Napolitano, and he is outnumbered.
And happily so.
Yes, we are fired up to have you here today. So much to get to on this Monday. Let's do it. All right, polls in the Ohio special election remain tight, and Republicans have been ramping up their efforts to try to keep that seat in a historically GOP district in the Columbus suburbs. President Trump in Ohio over the weekend speaking at a rally, calling on voters to support Troy Balderson.
We have a man that's going to fight for you. He's going to fight for Ohio, and he's going to be here for a long time. He will never, ever disappoint you. I found that out from the people that know him. He's just not going to disappoint you. He's really smart, and he's a really hard worker. Troy Balderson.
The president on Saturday also calling Balderson's Democratic opponent a Pelosi puppet.
They want to take away what we've given. They want to take away the... You ever see this? I mean, do you see Pelosi, who, by the way, again, controls Danny O'Connor, whoever the hell that is, but, you know.
Tell us what you really think. But Democrats are hoping an upset in the district can energize their fight to reclaim the majority in Congress. In the meantime, former Democratic Senator Joe Lieberman says the Dems have momentum nationally.
I will say that my prediction today is that it's going to be a blue wave, a Democratic wave, not a big wave in the House. Democrats retake the House if the elections are today. My guess is that the Republicans hold the Senate, but it's going to be close.
I will take it to our one lucky guy. What's your take?
I think the president is very gutsy to go there, because if he loses this, it'll be taken as a personal repudiation of him. I mean, this is a district that he carried by many percentage points. The Republicans have never lost this, and now a local, popular Democratic office holder, as I understand it, he's an office holder already, is neck and neck with the Republican establishment choice in the most Republican state in the union, and the president has to go in there. I don't know what the outcome is going to be, but if he loses, it'll be very bad for the Republicans.
On that note, this is what Congressman Peter King thought about President Trump's appeal to voters.
Rank and file people, they identify with President Trump. He's able to connect with them. He cuts through a lot of the BS. He cuts through a lot of the Washington talk. He strikes a very responsive chord. So, no, he's out there. Listen, people may not agree with everything he says, but the fact is he is able to connect, and that's a unique ability to have.
I don't think anybody can dispute what Congressman King just said.
Jessica might.
Well, I bet Jessica agrees with this. The race is going to be decided not by the base of Republicans or Democrats.
By independents.
Correct.
Yeah, absolutely. That's what's going on here. The judge is correct. We can't dispute the president's ability to connect, certainly when he's having a rally. Troy Balderson is an interesting Republican, though, because he's Trump and Kasich endorsed, which I think rarely happens. Yeah. And Governor Kasich was on the Sunday shows yesterday, and he pointed out, actually, that Balderson didn't even invite him, that Trump just said he was coming, and then Balderson said, oh, I guess I should show up at this thing. So he was really going the more moderate Kasich route there, because Columbus is obviously a big liberal bastion there, and he's trying to protect the suburbs, where a lot of white women actually have been moving away from the president, and independents are really where this race is going to be won. But Danny O'Connor is very similar to Connor Lamb, which we saw in the Pennsylvania special election upset. Very moderate, against Medicare for all, for instance.
Pro-life Democrat like Connor Lamb?
I don't.
Pro-Second Amendment?
Well, that's why. Well, that's why.
We're
all pro-Second Amendment. We're just for responsible.
Okay, hang on. I don't want to get off. I don't want to get off topic.
This car just drove in the ditch.
No. It is wonderful deniability, though, to say I didn't even invite President Trump. He just showed up. I'm really with Kasich. That would make moderates feel good, while those who support President Trump, Kennedy, would love to have President Trump there. I mean, maybe they're threading the needle very cleverly.
Well, it's really difficult. He's in a difficult position because you couldn't have too two more different Republicans than John Kasich and Donald Trump. John Kasich he's been so adamant in his, personal Republican resistance to the president. He's also he's floated the idea of an independent run in 2020. What's interesting about Danny O'Connor is, like Connor Lamb, when Democrats have figured out how to run smart candidates on local issues, they tend to do well.
Yes.
This is not Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez.
Nope.
No, and you're again seeing Democrats secretly getting very excited about a moderate, and those are the kind of candidates that do well in what could be once again toss-up states.
Here comes
Troy
Dagan.
Balderson, however, is a stronger candidate than ran against Connor Lamb, but I do think it's difficult for him because
let me get in here.
You can't upset Trump voters, and if you look like you are on the Kasich train and you are doubting the president, that could be problematic.
Pelosi puppet, genius way to try and label Danny O'Connor or Danny whoever the heck he is. Because with Connor Lamb smartly distanced himself from Nancy Pelosi, because again, it comes down to the numbers. And I push back. I don't think that a special election in a relatively wealthy district in Ohio has anything to do with the way people will vote in Southern Virginia or North Carolina or any of these other areas. It is all about, to ask somebody in 2 weeks who won that special election in Ohio. It is about how people feel at home. Particularly, it's not about independents, it's about women. It is about how women and mothers sitting at home feel about their pocketbooks, feel about their family finances, and feel about their financial security.
I want to ask you something about that, Dagan, really quick, because I think you're right, and that's what it boils down to. But where does the president put his weight? Does he continue to talk to the base and get them excited? Because that's a very different strategy than trying to go for some of those independent voters and some of those educated suburban women.
It's not the talk, it's the walk, and it's the policies and what they've actually produced in terms of economic growth in this country. I can go through all the numbers. Job growth on average this year, every month, is at a faster pace than it was
but
last
if the
year.
president...
Wait, let me finish the thought. But so it is about how people feel, and it's the numbers they're putting up. And I will say this, Lee Carter, who works for Man's Landscape Partners, did some dial testing. She said the intensity and enthusiasm has gained among Republicans in the last month, but also independents are maintaining support because of many of Trump's policies.
But if the president shows up uninvited and loses, he's going to feel the sting.
Well, no, he never feels the sting.
He
never feels the sting.
Republicans will feel the sting.
But you know what he's going to turn? He's going to turn around and say, "Oh, Nancy Pelosi and every single Democrat in Washington. You know that tax cut that almost everybody in this country has felt? They didn't vote for it, so they don't get credit for it. And what are they going to do? Try to raise your taxes if you put them in the House?
Certainly, the economy is what he should be running on. But a few points there. I believe, nationally speaking, that independents are actually starting to move away from Republicans towards Democrats. They are part of that enthusiasm gap that's shifting. And Danny O'Connor has been adamant.
Okay.
Danny O'Connor has been adamantly actually against Nancy Pelosi. If you look at his Twitter bio, it actually says we need a new generation of leadership. He is following the Connor Lamb play there. He did give an interview where he was pushed and pushed about whether he would support her leadership again, and he did back down. But I believe he's been asked 8 times.
You know that nuance because you're a Democrat.
Who has the soul of the party? Who has the soul of the party? Is it these moderates who talk about being pro-life and pro-Second Amendment, or is it the very loud progressives we're going to talk about later in the show who generate so much enthusiasm, but the unintended consequences of their policies will lead this country back?
Yeah, who think that all Republicans are toothless, smelly people at Walmart.
Yeah. Well, I can't thank you, Peter Strzok.
West by God, Virginia.
The Trump administration at midnight tonight reimposing the first batch of economic sanctions against Iran since President Trump decided to pull out of the nuclear agreement back in May, calling it, quote, the worst deal ever negotiated. National Security Advisor John Bolton saying we are already seeing U.S. pressure impacting Iran's economy and regime. Watch.
Really already seen some of the implications. The pressure on the Iranian economy is significant. The value of its currency is going through the floor. We've seen public reporting of massive flights of capital out of Iran. The elites are getting nervous. We continue to see demonstrations and riots in cities and towns all around Iran.
The president this weekend saying the ball is in Iran's court, tweeting, Iran and its economy is going very bad and fast. I will meet or not meet. It doesn't matter. It's up to them. Meantime, the European Union and U.S. allies Great Britain, France, and Germany announcing what they call a blocking statute to take effect Tuesday that would protect European firms that continue to do business with Iran. So what do you do here? Are there sanctions you can impose that really make a difference and bring Iran back to the table to renegotiate this deal, or do you just let Western Europe run roughshod all over their economy?
I happen to believe that the Iran deal was about the best you were going to get at the time under Barack Obama. I don't know that we're going to get anything better short of some kind of violence, and I don't know anybody, aside from John Bolton, that really wants the violence. This was an executive agreement between the President of the United States and the leaders of Iran. This was not a treaty ratified by the Senate. Therefore, though I may disagree with President Trump, he has every lawful and constitutional right to abrogate it, but of course he's got to face the consequences. It's divisive in the EU. The EU, as you just pointed out, is going to protect the businesses that continue to do business with Iran. I don't know how they're going to do that protection, because knowing Donald Trump is going to retaliate against the countries that permit their companies to do business in Iran.
Wait, can I just say, though, I don't think you meant to say that Ambassador Bolton wants violence. I think that what we're seeing is that he's talking about how
he's talking about regime change.
Regime change, they're being squeezed so tightly economically, and we're not hearing a lot about the riots and the various things, that the only other way to battle back, other than an agreement, is to put so much economic pressure that the mullah's death grip on their own population is overthrown.
But
that's what he's pressing for.
It's interesting because it's so tough with the theocracy. How do you undo that? Because the last thing Americans want is regime change in the Middle East. We don't want another protracted war. We don't want more death. A thriving economy, that's fine. That benefits everyone. But how on earth do you, encourage that sort of an uprising so they overthrow that horrific system?
I don't know if, for sure, obviously, but if you look at Saudi Arabia and the next generation of leaders that have come in, obviously they have a million miles to go in that country, but it is truly a population where 70% of the population is under 30, and they are looking for a more modern way forward just because they realize it exists out there.
Is that what it is, though? Is it the generational shift?
That's the only thing I could think of that would really do it.
The messaging out of Secretary of State Mike Pompeo has been brilliant. If you listen to that speech that he gave at the Reagan Library in late July, he painted the Iranian leadership as mobsters, as a bunch of members of the mafia, that the money that Iran got because of the Iran nuclear deal was directed to terrorist dictators and proxy militia rather than the welfare of ordinary Iranians. Mike Pompeo said the United States hears you talking about the Iranian people who are dealing with soaring unemployment and soaring inflation. The United States supports you. The United States is with you. And the protests we've seen, they're not against the United States. They are against the Iranian leaders and what is happening within that country.
They want what everyone else wants. I mean, they want what people in this country want. They want flexibility. They want to take care of their kids.
They want opportunity.
We should not have laws in this country that permit the President of the United States alone, without an authorization from the Congress, to ship $400 million in cash to the Iranian dictators.
Well,
to that extent, Mike Pompeo is right. What Barack Obama did was lawful. It should not have been lawful.
Okay, but by the way, and that was not a congressional treaty. That was not something that was ratified by the Senate.
Correct.
You can thank President Obama for that.
Okay, thank you, President Obama, for that.
Well, then don't complain about the consequences from President Trump acting unilaterally because of the way this deal was set up.
I was just doing that to make you happy. I think that we're in an awful mess here. I happen to agree with the judge that that deal was the best that we were going to get at that time. I am hopeful that we can get a better deal, and I think that economic jiggering is often how we get to a better place, because everyone just measures things based on their pocketbooks, right? And that's true of Europe, and it's going to be true of a place like Iran as well. In terms of another uprising, you are seeing a little bit of the same vibe that we had pre-Arab Spring, right? The young people out there, they're agitated. We are working to make sure that they have a free internet, for instance, that it's one of the most important things that we can do for the people in a place.
Have the mullahs shut down the internet?
It goes in and out, obviously, with how much they allow and what they cut off.
I just want to answer one thing that the judge said. As evidence that the real world never thought that this Iran deal would stand, American companies, for the most part, did not start inking deals and doing business in Iran. There were very few. Boeing is only one that I can think of off the top of my head. Europe, they just dove in head first.
Right.
That's why Europe is pushing back. The two most critical things that will happen is cutting off oil coming out of Iran, which will happen later this year. We have an incredibly strong energy production here in the United States, a strategic petroleum reserve that has 650 million barrels in it plus, but then also cutting off access to the SWIFT financial work. It's a messaging system that facilitates financial transactions around the world. You cut Iran off, you cut them off from the outside of the rest of the world.
But also it will be U.S. technology and the free market that saves the world. President Trump continues to ramp up his feud with the so-called fake news as some reporters raise alarms over his rhetoric, but the White House defending his criticism, saying it's the media that's been launching dishonest attacks. We will debate. Plus, we could be just days away from learning if President Trump will agree to an interview with special counsel Robert Mueller. Will it happen? And what to make of the Mueller probe at this point?
I'm comfortable in saying this. If there was evidence, strong evidence of collusion, I guarantee you it would have been leaked by now. But let's wait for the process to play itself out.
This program in the election watch.
Probably the biggest thing that the president could do is confront Moscow to establish some kind of deterrent, but instead exactly the opposite message is being sent, and that is, and I think this was delivered vulnerable.
The president's lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, reportedly says a final decision on...
In the midterms, Vladimir Putin can count on the president to never call him out, and that leaves us all too vulnerable.
The president's lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, reportedly says a final decision on a Mueller... Did they have dirt on the opposition?
Right.
I'm confused, though, because the Democrats paid a foreign government for foreign entities
You're confused because Mueller's...
dirt on Trump.
You think Mueller's investigating the wrong side.
Well, no, I'm confused as to what is and isn't legal.
All right, so
straighten us out.
No there is no such law, and there is no such word in the law as collusion. That's a Hollywood and media term. The legal term is conspiracy. Not did the Trump campaign and the Russians work together, but was there an agreement to work together? The crime is the agreement, whether the agreement was put into place or not. That's what Bob Mueller is looking for.
I like paying for the dossier. That's an agreement.
Except that he's not investigating that. He's investigating whether or not the people from the Trump campaign entered into an agreement to receive dirt from Hillary, whether the dirt was received or not. The crime, if there were a crime, is receiving anything of value from a foreign person, entity, or government.
Like
if there is
if
there's an agreement to do that. Well, the dossier was prepared by a person working for a law firm hired by Hillary Clinton.
So you're basically just laundering guilt at that point.
Well, you know, you may argue, and I've argued this unsuccessfully, that an agreement that ends up not being carried out shouldn't be a crime. But it is. It's the prosecutor's favorite crime. It's called conspiracy. It's the easiest to prove. All you need to know is who agreed and that one of them took a step in furtherance of the agreement.
Well, if you hire someone to kill someone, that's a crime, because even if they aren't successful, that's why it should be.
Correct. And if two people hire someone to kill someone, whether that killing takes place or not, they can be prosecuted for conspiracy to commit murder, even though there was no murder. The reason Jay, I'm pointing where he was, Sekulow is so upset is because he told Bob Mueller that the meeting with the Russians was about Russian adoptions. And when lawyers make misrepresentations like that, then other lawyers stop believing them. He said, look, this is what I was told by my client at the time. And his client, the president, initially said it was about adoptions. Over the weekend, he acknowledged what it was truly about, which was whether or not they were going to get dirt from Hillary. The president is also worried about his son, because his son testified under oath that this was not about dirt from Hillary and that his father didn't know about it, and there appears to be evidence to the contrary.
From the outside looking in, doesn't it look like increasingly that the Mueller team is setting a trap for the president if he decides to speak with him?
Absolutely.
And so potentially listening to the advice of you on this sofa regularly and his own attorneys, how in the world could he ever cooperate and sit down with Mueller for an interview, knowing that if you tell one lie to Bob Mueller, he will move to file charges.
He could not tell a lie. That's always an option here. There have been so many lies spewed out from the beginning. You know, the president had nothing to do with the statement originally on Air Force One. He absolutely did. And Hope Hicks, by the way, was back on Air Force One this weekend, which seemed like very odd timing then that the tweet came out in the morning. Don Jr. said the wrong reason that the meeting happened in the first place. You have Michael Cohen, who knows how many more tapes are going to come out, or him saying, actually, there were more people in the room.
But it's more insidious than that, because you never know what Mueller, but you never know what Mueller has on you, despite all the prep work that his attorneys do with him. And another thing is, it would seem like that the president wants to sit down to get this out of the way, but we don't know how far Mueller is into this.
And I understand the president is incredibly emphatic about his innocence in the entire thing. I think that he should sit down. I think that he should have, and I'm sure there will be parameters. And I think he should dare them to impeach him, because even if there is a Democratic majority in the House, and that's the avenue they go down, he's never going to be impeached. But it is almost an insurance policy that guarantees his reelection, because he will, and this is really the only scenario where he casts himself as the victim. He did the right thing politically. He sat down, he answered the questions, and if he is charged with a procedural crime that, in essence is somehow Robert Mueller telling Congress, go ahead and impeach him, because we're not going to charge him.
Jessica, respond real quick before we run out of time.
I think that the president should do whatever he can to make it clear that he was not involved. I believe that he wasn't. The people around him were the ones who were, that Don Jr. thinks, Jared Kushner, et cetera.
The president's going to do what he wants to do, no matter what Rudy and lawyers
advise. But it seems like these lawyers are holding him back a little bit. I think he would have done it months ago.
It's so much more fun, though, the tweeting. And if he sits down with a Mueller interview, he's going to leak everything he said. He's going to be tweeting as soon as he walks out of the interview. All right, here's what I told Bob Mueller.
Gotta go. I love it. All right, top Democrats doubling down on their calls for the party to move further left, with thousands gathering this weekend to rally for a more radical agenda to win in 2020. But how will voters react to the rhetoric?
Republicans are going to call us socialists no matter what we do. So we might as well give them the real thing.
Well, it was supposed to be about the midterms, but 2020 became the storyline. Of course, thousands of liberal activists gathered at the Netroots Nation Conference this weekend in New Orleans to hear about the new direction of the Democratic Party. There were campaign-style speeches from Senators Elizabeth Warren, Cory Booker, and Kamala Harris, House candidate Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio, all urging a more progressive agenda to take back the White House. Senator Warren, who previously said she would not run in 2020, saying the president is the reason she may change her mind. Liz?
It won't be easy. We're going to have to fight uphill. But me, I'm going up that hill, and I hope you are too. And I hope that when you do, you'll reach your hand out and bring someone else along for the climb.
All right, very good. We're all going to Everest. Meanwhile, listen to this from New York gubernatorial candidate Cynthia Nixon, continuing her push to make socialism more mainstream in the party.
I am proud to be one of a small but growing number of candidates to identify as a democratic socialist. The establishment is terrified of that word, socialism. Republicans are going to call us socialists no matter what we do, so we might as well give them the real thing.
Oh, mercy, you're never going to hear that conversation over brunch. I agree, Judge. I absolutely agree with her in that if you're really going to teach people in this country about socialism, you should give them the real thing. So Cynthia Nixon should take plane loads of people down to Venezuela. And see how they exist for 2 weeks.
I really don't think that this is the future of the Democratic Party. I think, I'm looking at my dear friend Jessica, I think the future of the Democratic Party is the Connor Lambs and the Danny O'Connors and the moderate Democrats, because this hard left stuff will do to the Democrats what, and this was my baptism into politics, Barry Goldwater's conservatism did in 1964 to the Republicans, make it a minority party until some giant like Ronald Reagan comes along and makes the word conservatism respectable. I don't think socialism can ever be respectable because of its inherent defects of stealing from A to give to be.
But
I think this is bad politics.
I don't think young people remember that enough. I mean, I don't think they're familiar enough with socialism that in a vacuum it sounds like a good thing. I mean, all you have to do is work as a waitress at a restaurant and a place where you pool tips. And you work really hard and somebody else doesn't work hard and you pool the tips and all of a sudden you're both standing there with the same amount of money and all of a sudden young people understand why socialism doesn't work. And I'll add one more on to that. Then the people making a lot of money stop putting all their money in. This happened at a restaurant I worked at. I think anybody who's worked as a waitress knows that the kind of thing does not work. But inherently, there's something now to young people that sounds noble and heroic about socialism. They have forgotten the real lesson, I think.
But the economic consequences, I want to ring Dagan in, because the economic consequences, if this country really does give into the socialist experiment, and I fear that at some point they're going to, what happens to the economy when you have things like universal basic income and Medicare for all?
It goes down the toilet. Everybody should just move to New York City and see how far your tax dollars go. You get urinating and defecating in the streets and potholes the size of Rhode Island. That's what your money gets you in a place like New York. And I'll just point out, it would be lovely if the Democrats knew some basic math in terms of the Medicare for all. Great slogan, right? Great message. Well, we found out last week, a couple weeks ago, it cost $33 trillion in the first 10 years of Medicare. To put that in perspective, you would have to double what the government collects in taxes from individuals and corporations in this country, and it still would not be enough to cover it. You know what's going to happen in 8 years? The Medicare Hospital Trust Fund goes bankrupt. It runs out of money, and they're going to be able to pay benefits about 90 cents on the dollar. That means there's going to be that immediate benefit cut to anybody on Medicare, and not one jerk in Washington has stepped up to fix it.
It's interesting because there were two think tanks that did cost-benefit analyses of this, and Bernie Sanders' office hasn't. Fox News reached out to Bernie Sanders' office, and they really hadn't run the numbers. They don't know what it's going to cost.
Well, you did see that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez now gave quite an infamous interview with Trevor Noah on The Daily Show, which was certainly the friendliest of audiences that you might have in terms of talking about this. And
did she know what she was talking about?
No, she did not. And that... I get it, she's young and she's learning, and I would encourage all young people to get involved in politics. I think it's an exciting thing to do. But if you are going to toe-to-toe with people who are all about the numbers, you have to have the numbers. I'm personally not a member of the Medicare for All caucus. The moderates that you named are not as well. We have seen a shift left here in the party that came out of 2016, and you have people like Kamala Harris now who is in that caucus. But also when you hear her speak, it's quite moderate in a lot of the things she's talking about nationwide. It almost sounds like Hillary Clinton, who was more for public-private partnerships, like the experiment we had in Vermont, for instance, where there is always going to be a public option, but that we still keep private health care providers. And
they abandoned their socialist health care push in Bernie Sanders' home state.
Yes, I just want to add this. The slogan for these morons should be, we make better decisions with your money than you do. That should be their slogan, because that's what they believe.
And I will sponsor this. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez go against McD.
I love it.
Well, I got one up because I know how the unemployment rate is calculated.
She wouldn't emerge with anything but bloody stumps, politically speaking, of course. President Trump not letting up on what he calls fake news, the latest from the president, as the White House comes to his defense over concerns that his remarks are out of line. We will debate next.
To look at me now, you don't see psoriasis. You see clear skin.
You see me.
But if you saw me before Cosentyx...
President Trump ramping up his battle with mainstream media in a Twitter barrage. The president tweeting, quote, "The fake news hates me, saying that they are the enemy of the people only because they know it's true. I am providing a great service by explaining this to the American people. They purposely cause great division and distrust. They can also cause war, and they are very dangerous and sick." Counselor to the president, Kellyanne Conway, defending the president's remarks, saying he's targeting reporters and media outlets that don't tell the truth. Watch.
I think the president's entire point is this, that we do have a news media that includes some reporters. So this should not be a broad brush by any statement. I said that before. His daughter said it last week. And I know he believes it's not all. That's why he said it really refers to those who aren't always telling the truth and who are giving emotion over information, who are talking more about their own egos than doing everyman interviews.
But New York Times columnist Bret Stephens warns that the president's attacks on the media could lead to violence. Stephens writing this, quote, maybe Trump thinks that most journalists, with their relentless hostility to his personality and policies, richly deserve public scorn. What should be clear is this. We are approaching a day when blood on the newsroom floor will be blood on the president's hands. Kennedy, how over the top is this, and why isn't there more outrage at that kind of comment?
I think both sides are overheated and misguided, but, you know, that sort of hysteria is actually very dangerous because you're almost goading people into violence. And I think, you know, journalists have to do an examination and say, what is journalism? What are the questions we are supposed to ask? How do we seek the truth objectively, and how do we call truth to power? Because that is a critical function of the press in this country. But also, the president has to accept that he will be challenged. And I understand that he's frustrated because there's such an overwhelming amount of negative coverage from the media. But given that, you know, he also has to call out media sources that he thinks are doing a great job. And you don't always have to agree with the president. It's actually okay to be skeptical every once in a while.
Well, there's so many people, Judge, on TV every day that they love being upset and outraged. I call it manufactured outrage. And it's asymmetric rage, too. It's not symmetrical with what was actually said very often or what has actually happened in this country. But they love it because they love being, one, the center of attention, and two, they enjoy not really doing any policy work and research, and they can just be lazy and say whatever comes to their mind.
I'm going to agree with both Kennedy and Bret Stephens. It is the duty of the press to challenge the government. Under the law, and thanks to some wonderful interpretations of the First Amendment, the press, the media, is the eyes and ears of the public. They have the right to dig. They have the right to knock on doors. They have the right to ask whatever questions you want. If you read the column from which the excerpt that we cited from Bret Stephens, talks about threats that he received.
Yes, but do you see what he received those threats after he said, perhaps the reason Trump voters are so frequently the subject of caricature is they so frequently conform to type. It started with him insulting people who support the president, which is where a lot of these things go off the rails.
But his argument is, if the president gives cover to the threats by his own verbiage, that's wrong, and he's going to make things worse.
Of course.
And that's where Bret Stephens is correct.
But Bret Stephens started by insulting the people who support the president. That's not helpful either. None of these things are good.
No, your insults should be pointed, I would say. If you have qualms with a specific group because, you know, go after them on policy, go after them on things that they actually believe or they have done. There is also a caricature of what a lefty looks like, right? And that gets used in mainstream media all the time as well, that we're all out there screaming, abolish ICE, abolish ICE, and we're not. We're sitting amongst you talking about moderate proposals. So, but the idea that Bret Stephens could be as big of a factor in this as the President of the United States of America, I think is really unfair here.
Who said that?
Well, to be having a conversation about them in equal measure, or to say this and that.
I don't think anyone's doing that.
But we're doing exactly what you said you're supposed to do. You're taking one specific example and taking it apart and pointing out the flaws. Yeah. I think that's a reasonable thing to do.
I think to say that because this columnist started off by insulting this group, that if anything is warranted to be coming back in, we also...
No, we never said that. Please let me make sure that you
absolutely opposite of that.
That's for sure not the case, that the president in no way should be tweeting these things, that doesn't make sense. But it's important to note that it wasn't in response to some sort of, you were saying drilling down on the facts of the matter. This started with someone insulting in an opinion piece the people who voted for the president.
That doesn't justify threatening him.
No, it doesn't justify it. It doesn't, but it's also bad behavior. It's like everybody needs to stop with all of this.
The president is saying it could lead to war. You saw Chris Wallace push back on this yesterday on Fox News Sunday, where he said, what war have we started? And I would just go back to, and I take your point, and I'm sorry that I conflated what you said there in any way, and I didn't mean to, but you have the President of the United States of America, the most powerful person in the world, harming the Fourth Estate in irreparable ways. And this isn't Jim Acosta's fault.
Words don't, you know what? Words don't cut. They don't cut. They cut the fragile ego of some journalists that I happen to know here in New York City. And by the way, he's merely touching on how the American people feel about journalists. It's my parents always hated hearing appomattox rather than appomattox on national television because nobody ever bothered to figure out how to say Powhatan correctly. So again, it's not something created by the president. He is merely expressing how the American people feel. But that's why he got elected.
What's Powhatan?
Powhatan County. It's in Virginia. Senate Democrats reportedly now agreeing to meet with Judge Brett Kavanaugh after they lost ground last week in their fight for documents on the president's Supreme Court nominee. Oh boy, the judge is raring to go on this one. This as a pro-Trump group prepares to target vulnerable Democrats in new TV ads. Whether the party can take the heat, we debate.
The battle to confirm Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh still hot, even with the Senate recess. Senate Democrats reportedly planning to begin meeting with Kavanaugh. When they return, they will question him on issues and demand documents related to his time working in the Bush 43 White House. The White House slamming Senate Democrats in a statement for dragging their feet and demanding what it calls irrelevant documents. Meantime, political reporting, a well-funded pro-Trump group will launch ads on Wednesday against red state Democrats facing a tough re-election fight this November. Of that group, only Senator Manchin has met with Kavanaugh. Former Senator and VP candidate Joe Lieberman calls the process a tit-for-tat game. Watch.
The Republicans stopped President Obama's nomination of Merrick Garland to the Supreme Court a couple of years ago, and so the Democrats are going to try procedurally to stop Kavanaugh from coming up for a vote because they're hoping that more Democrats will be elected in this November's elections. If it comes to a vote before, then my guess is that most all the Republicans hold for Judge Kavanaugh, and maybe a couple of Democrats, particularly those in moderate states who are moderates themselves, will vote for him.
Thank you, Joe. So, Judge, let's discuss what is the right thing for Democrats to do, given they have a lot of resistance, but what should they be after?
Here's the issue. Those who are rejoicing that the Democrats are finally willing to meet with Judge Kavanaugh need to know they're not doing this because they're suddenly going to vote for him. They're doing this because they want to press him personally for his documents and his papers, which are in the National Archives. You're talking about 1.5 million pages of documents that he prepared when he worked in the Bush White House on things like torture, rendition, surveillance, forget about the Fourth Amendment. Now, when Elena Kagan, currently on the Supreme Court, was nominated by Barack Obama, and the Republicans asked for her papers when she worked in the Obama White House, the Obama White House surrendered them.
But she was a legal counsel, wasn't she? And Kavanaugh wasn't. I thought he was staff secretary.
I don't think that there's any difference. The point is he was still giving advice to the President of the United States on issues that he may have to rule on now. For
example, fair game?
I think it is fair game. I think those documents should be available. Can you imagine Rand Paul's reaction? He's already come out in favor of Judge Kavanaugh.
Yes.
If he sees memos to George W. Bush in favor of torture or rendition.
But it wasn't supposed to be about his legal advice. He was organizing paper from other executive branches. He wasn't giving his legal advice in that capacity.
So you say it's not fair game, only his decisions as
That's how they've said that's what that job is.
We don't know that until we see the documents. And if they keep the documents from our view, we won't know if that is true.
It feels like they're hiding something, Jessica.
Well, it does, and there are always little clues in this. I mean, we saw a report that they're looking at Judge Kavanaugh's wife's emails, right, to see if certain keywords. No, I'm saying, but that's where we are in this conversation. So even if they're getting papers that are just staff papers shuffling around, they will be looking for clues in there that could indicate how he would feel about issues that may come before the
Dagan, with all of this jockeying and, you know, all of the gamesmanship, will Kavanaugh be confirmed?
Yes, because there's pressure on Joe Manchin, Joe Donnelly in Indiana, and Heidi Heitkamp, who voted for Neil Gorsuch.
Will they do it before the midterms?
Yes, absolutely. Yes. It is a winner for the base.
The Democrats do not have the numbers.
Right.
I mean, Joe Lieberman was right. The Republicans started this by not even considering Merrick Garland. But the Democrats don't have the numbers to block Judge Kavanaugh.
All right, but was Garland borked?
He wasn't even considered. Don't Don't get me going on Bork.
Well, don't you worry about a thing, because we have more Outnumbered in just a moment. There's so much show on the other side. Stay right here. The battle to confirm Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh still hot, even with the Senate recess. Senate Democrats reportedly planning to begin meeting with Kavanaugh. When they return, they will question him on issues and demand documents related to his time working in the Bush 43 White House. The White House slamming Senate Democrats in a statement for dragging their feet and demanding what it calls irrelevant documents. Meantime, political reporting, a well-funded pro-Trump group will launch ads on Wednesday against red state Democrats facing a tough re-election fight this November. Of that group, only Senator Manchin has met with Kavanaugh. Former Senator and VP candidate Joe Lieberman calls the process a tit-for-tat game. Watch.
The Republicans stopped President Obama's nomination of Merrick Garland to the Supreme Court a couple of years ago, and so the Democrats are going to try procedurally to stop Kavanaugh from coming up for a vote, because they're hoping that more Democrats will be elected in this November's elections. If it comes to a vote before, then my guess is that most all the Republicans hold for Judge Kavanaugh, and maybe a couple of Democrats, particularly those in moderate states who are moderates themselves, will vote for him.
Thank you, Joe. So, Judge, let's discuss what is the right thing for Democrats to do, given they have a lot of resistance, but what should they be after?
Here's the issue. Those who are rejoicing that the Democrats are finally willing to meet with Judge